Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. This is a tough intro I'm recording here on Monday, October 20th. It's late at night. Like probably all of you, I heard earlier today the news about 29-year-old Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky's passing, and I was just in utter shock. He was one of the brightest lights in the chess world, just an immensely talented and kind person. And it's been a rough day, just been devastating. So I had another episode ready to go for tomorrow. But if you're like me, it might be hard to think about something else that's at least chess wise. That's certainly how I felt. So I decided to re up my 2020 interview with Danya, so this is about August 2020, 5, 6 months into the pandemic. Danya's star was rising rapidly at the time. His YouTube channel was blowing up. I had gone from the early years of Perpetual Chess, having trouble pronouncing his name repeatedly, to being a massive fan of his like everyone else. I mean, such a incredibly gifted player and also teacher and commentator, kind of triple threat, just had it all. And as you hear in the interview, his kindness and great storytelling and love of chess really comes across. So some of you may have already heard this interview. You might not want to hear it right now. I'm sure in the coming weeks and months, Daniel's name will be coming up a lot on the podcast, probably eventually do another tribute of some sort, but obviously wounds are very fresh. I've been really incredibly moved by how many lives Danya touched, including mine, of course, but just so many people. Um, so, so yeah, this podcast is ad free, and we'll be back next week with an interview with Grandmaster Andy Soltis, the legendary author, where we didn't talk about this news at all because it was recorded last week. And then we'll be getting to regular programming and discussing this awful story, as well as everything else going on in the chess world. Oh, and also for those of you watching on YouTube, this interview back in 2020, I wasn't even doing video yet for the podcast. So the video that you're watching is going to transition into just like a squiggly line with a picture of Danya as he's talking. Audio wise, it should be regular for those of you listening. But yeah, I can't believe it was 5 years ago, and I can't believe that Grandmaster Naroditsky is gone. Rest in peace to Danya, and um, and here's the interview. Hey everyone, welcome back to Perpetual Chess. I have a guest I am super excited to talk to this week. I've been wanting to interview him for a long time, and now here he is. I'm looking right at him. He is the former world under-12 champion, U.S. junior champion. He became a grandmaster in 2013. He is a Stanford University graduate. He is one of the United States' top players. He is an author. He's been an author since he was like 12 or something. He's a beloved chess announcer for chess.com, very popular Twitch streamer. And now he has a YouTube channel that's blowing up just for good measure. Speed Chess and Bullet Wizard, who holds his own with anyone from Magnus Carlsen on down. So much to talk about. So I will stop talking and bring him in. Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, how are you, sir?
I'm good, and thank you so much for having me, Ben. Perpetual Chess has been the only thing that's been playing in my car for the last 5 months, I think. So I'm a big fan of your show, and it's really an honor to be here and to be interviewed by you.
That's awesome to hear. That really means a lot to me. And I'm going to call your bluff or put you on the spot, Danya, and ask which interview or interviews you enjoyed.
Of late, the one that I might have enjoyed the most was International Master John Watson. And I am a sucker for chess stories. So anything where I love hearing about him hanging out with Tal, all those old Soviet players at tournaments, I love hearing about that. And actually, the very latest one with, I think, Andrew Zinn.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed hearing about that too, because, of course, I'm very passionate about chess teaching. So hearing how an adult improver went from, 1500 to 2100 firsthand, I feel like that's already enriched some of the things that I'm going to do with my students. So that was very interesting as well.
Cool. That's awesome to hear. I mean, I know like listeners, I know you guys love the adult improver interviews. I like them as well, but I'm always impressed when title players like yourself listen to them and have that perspective, because that shows like some empathy. You're not just thinking, it's not just about you and it's not just about the stories, it's about learning more about the craft.
Right, exactly. I love hearing about just how honest, hardworking chess players get better. It's always interesting, gives me a rush.
Cool. Okay. Well, Danya, we have so much to talk about, but we're recording here on Thursday. Of course, I don't know the date, August 20th, and I have to ask you because the Impact Chess just wrapped with just super dramatic finale. I usually don't talk a ton of chess current events, but just because it was so momentous, I have to ask if you caught any of today's finale between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen.
Well, I did, and I had to pull over to watch the first two Blitz games, and then I ran into my apartment and then put it on the TV, and I watched the Armageddon with my hands shaking. And
Yeah.
I felt like I was maybe even more nervous than the players. I mean, this is what makes me love chess. I mean, I live for these moments. You could not have scripted it any better. They both put their blood, sweat, and tears on the line, and it was just an incredible match. I caught most of the games, most of the sets, and I even had the pleasure of commentating one of the sets in Russian, actually, with Grandmaster Sergei Shipov's channel. So it was a fascinating tournament.
Yeah, we'll get back to you commentating in Russian later in the interview. But yeah, I had a similar experience. I was out with my kids and kind of tracking the results on my phone, and then finally I had to put on the YouTube on the Bluetooth in my car for the fourth and final match. So I'm driving home with that on the audio, trying not to look. I'm not going to get in a car accident, being safe, but just to hear what's going on, and then manage to catch the Blitz and the Armageddon. So much fun. And yeah, they both obviously would have deserved to win, but I did want to ask you, the one sort of topical matter from this is on Twitter, a lot of people go back and forth about them eventually going to Armageddon. For listeners who aren't familiar, Armageddon games are basically where, in order to break a tie, black gets 1 minute less and gets draw odds. And some people think this adds even more sort of energy and suspense, but other people think they should just basically play Blitz until someone passes out. What's your opinion, Danya?
I like the concept of Armageddon. I mean, in terms of the intrigue, it adds a tremendous amount of it. And there have been discussions for a long time about how to not so much eliminate draws, but incorporate draws as a somewhat tie-breaking result as well. And that's essentially what Armageddon does. A draw is still possible from a sporting perspective, but essentially it's a win for one of the players. I, of course, also like watching fights to the death, but I'm sensitive to the fact that both of those players were exhausted by the end. So I don't think it's kind of a Deus ex machina, just kind of end the match already. It's not like they haven't been playing for a very long time, and I think when they play on equal terms for so long, I don't see anything wrong with that. And selfishly, it's always so interesting for me to watch.
You've got the proper showing off your history degree with the Deus Ex Machina use. I used to call it a Deus Ex Machina because I had only read the words. Nicely done. But yeah, I generally agree with you. I feel like, okay, maybe you could try to avoid it for a little bit longer. Throw in a couple more Blitz matches. Like today, after the 4 rapid games, they played 2 Blitz games, which only when those ended tied did they go to Armageddon. So, okay, maybe you could make them play 4, maybe 6. But like you say, this is the end of a long meat grinder of a tournament. So at some point, maybe you just end it. Although with online, at least like in when people argue about tie breaks in OTB tournaments, they talk about like you only have the space for a certain amount of time. People have travel plans. With online, at least those don't come into to play. So I think maybe you could torture them with more chess a little bit more.
That is very true. I would have loved to see that. And also it brings up the point that, you don't necessarily want the results of the entire match sort of condensed into necessarily one moment. There's something to be said for that intrigue wise, but I totally see your point and I agree. Maybe something like a compromise 4 to 6 games would have been nice. Selfishly, I would have loved to see some bullet, but well, I don't think that's ever going to happen. That's just my inner demon speaking. So
Oh
I
man.
completely agree. I think maybe 4-6 Blitz games and then an Armageddon would be entirely reasonable.
Yeah. Well, since you brought it up, Danya, I'm going to go ahead and ask you about your bullet
Oh, no,
exploits.
what did I do?
No,
Why
I
did I
mean,
say that?
it, it's so much fun. I mean,
Mhm.
watching you and Magnus go head to head, and obviously, Penguin GM, whoever it is that you're playing, but it's just so mind boggling to watch. I mean, obviously, you've been a top player, for what, 12, 13 years, top for your age now, just top in the country. But at what point did you realize like that you were especially good at the faster games?
Well, I've been playing Blitz as long as I can remember. Of course, I played on the Internet Chess Club since I think 2004. That was the first time my dad made me an account. And bullet wise, I remember that I had an allotment of bullet games that I could play per week. And I vividly remember this. If I had trained diligently for the whole week, then on Sunday, I remember those Sundays, my dad would allow me to play, I think, 10 bullet games. And I lived for those Sundays. And I realized pretty early on that because of my sort of very tactical, aggressive proclivities, I was kind of predisposed, I think, to be good at bullet and well, sometimes bad at classical, but I'm sure we'll get to that. And I loved playing Blitz when we had my coach over. It was always Blitz until the late hours of the night. I could play Blitz all night nonstop again since the time that I was 9 or 10. And, I had a pretty high rating on the Internet Chess Club, even as a national master, FIDE master. I'd compete with a lot of GMs. Um, and I certainly had a lot of those late night sessions. So it was pretty early on that I realized I was, I think, particularly good at Blitz and Bullet, and also pretty early on that I realized I was addicted to Blitz and Bullet. And then, I branched out. I started playing on chess.com. I started experimenting with 30-second chess, which, some may argue is not really chess. And I don't necessarily dispute that. And that's the thing. I don't necessarily think Blitz should be mentioned in the same breath as classical chess, but that doesn't make Blitz or even Bullet inferior to classical chess. It just adds a different dimension to it. Perhaps it could even be called a different variant. And I just think I happen to be good and very much enjoy that variant. Again, I don't think that there should necessarily be a head-to-head comparison between Blitz and classical. But long story short, I always lived for over the board tournaments. There was always an annual Blitz tournament at the Mechanics Institute Chess Club in San Francisco, and even if I had tons of homework, I would beg my parents to take me there every year, and I would live for that tournament. So it's, my whole life, I feel like my whole chess career has always revolved around long Blitz sessions, and I've always enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, and it shows in the quality of your skills. So you mentioned that your parents had rules for your bullet chess. Did they have rules for your blitz as well, or was that allowed?
Well, the rules for Blitz were instituted after one particular episode. This was, I think, I was 1800 at the time. This was maybe around 2005 or so. Don't quote me on that. And as it went, there was a night, and this was recently after I'd gotten my first laptop and an internet connection. And I vividly remember that I played 70 Blitz games in one night and I remember the number because after that, my dad went into my rating history on ICC and counted it. And this was a Monday night. And I remember that because Tuesday night was the chess game at the Mechanics Institute. It was Tuesday night marathon. So every Tuesday, there would be a club game. And I was paired against the 1600. And on move 15, I had a knight on h5 and he had a queen on d1. And I did not move that knight from h5. And it was captured by my opponent's queen. And of course, I lost 3 moves later and spun a whole story about how I'd sacrificed it and miscalculated an epic line, 6 moves in. It was all, of course, a complete lie. But my coach at the time, International Master John Donaldson, who was the director of the Mechanics Institute, someone to whom I owe a tremendous debt of gratitude. He was one of the people who raised me as a chess player and instilled in me a lot of the chess culture and class and love of chess history that I have. He's one of the premier chess historians. But John was not fooled. He knew exactly what was causing this. And it was, of course, my addiction to Blitz, because at that time I wasn't well formed enough as a chess player to know how to incorporate Blitz. And it was still very much harming my play and my decision making. And so after that, an allotment was instituted, and I think that that actually really, really helped me because, well, not only did I finally contain my addiction, but also the actual quality of the Blitz games that I did play was significantly increased. And even to this day, I always take Blitz. Like, to me, Blitz is not usually a time where I just kind of relax and, you know, kick my flip flops out and just lay down in my recline in my chair. It's always serious, and I always treat it as a serious endeavor, even though it's a lot of fun. So I think that's how that started. And of course, later on after that, I went back to playing 70 games in a night, or 100 or 570. There were plenty of those nights as well, but I think that's how that started.
Okay, yeah, and you've written on chess.com. You did a great series giving some pointers for Blitz. Could you share a few of those highlights, just for listeners? Like, I've mentioned a couple times in recent interviews, I've always been one of these guys who's better at slow chess than fast chess. And now that we're all trapped at home and that chess is moving online, I feel like, I mean, I'm over the hill to begin with, but I'm at least trying to address it. I'm trying to get faster and work specifically on Blitz. So I know you still do some teaching. So what do you see in your students, common mistakes, practical tips that you're able to give to people?
Well, of course, I could probably write a book about this, and maybe I will one
You should, yeah.
day. That'll be interesting. But I'll identify a couple of things, and I'll try to keep it concise. Um, First of all, talking about tactics, obviously everybody knows that tactical vision, sharp tactical vision is tremendously important in for Blitz success and for chess success as a whole, but especially to be a good Blitz and bullet player, you got to be able to very quickly spot tactical patterns. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is, some of my students come to me and they say, I'm very bad at tactics. I blunder all the time. I don't see tactics. And, you know, I don't even know what to compare it to, but in my opinion, you can't really be bad at tactics as a whole. Usually what happens is they're bad at a particular subset of tactics. And when I go into their games and take a deep dive into their actual nature of their blunders, I find, usually, not always, but in a lot of cases, I find that they tend to commit certain types of tactical errors. So I'll literally find that they often miss pins, but not forks, or they'll often miss moves from side to side. I had one student who would regularly miss diagonal queen moves, moving the queen from one flank to the other flank. So, without getting too micro about this, I think that it usually is possible to be more granular when it comes to diagnosing tactical weaknesses. In the same vein, you can be very good at spotting tactical patterns, but bad at calculation. Or you could be good at visualization calculation, but bad at spotting tactical patterns. And I think each of those things has a different prescription when it comes to improving them. There's a lot of commonalities, of course, and they all involve solving and they all involve regular tactical maintenance. But that's one thing that I'd point out. So I would advise for people who are maybe performing self-diagnoses to try to be as granular as possible, because usually it is possible to go beyond saying I'm bad at tactics, or even I'm bad at positional chess, or I'm bad at endgames, and actually understand, well, are you bad at practical endgames, or do you not know, the Philidor position, and etc. So that's one thing. The other thing I'd point out is that oftentimes, you know, players have a certain image of themselves, and a lot of players think of themselves as slow. You hear a lot of players, I kind of like Blitz, but I'm too slow for bullet or too slow for Blitz. But then sometimes I'll almost prescribe to my student bullet games. Well, that sounds like the best kind of medicine possible. But some of them will resist, and they'll say, I'm never going to be able to. I'm so bad at bullet. But when they force themselves to play intuitively, and there's several exercises that I've designed to work on that as well, when they force themselves to play intuitively, and this has to be done, of course, in moderation, or else you'll end up like me blundering the knight on h5 when you play classical chess, they find that their intuition is actually quite good, and they're able to work on it, and they're able to get faster. And On that note as well, I think that logistical things are more important than people realize. Sometimes getting a mouse can allow you to raise your speed exponentially, and people just play with kind of a crappy trackpad, or getting a better internet connection, or just not playing when you're exhausted. I think a lot of people, perhaps without noticing, play when they're exhausted, and most people don't have the luxury of not playing when they're tired. I realize that people work very hard and they often play to unwind after work. But, I think everybody can at least try to find times when they're feeling relatively perked up, maybe on the weekends, and comparing their performance then, because they might realize that they're actually capable of playing very good Blitz and Bullet. So those are a couple of general pieces of advice. Of course, I could go on and on about this. The one more thing I'll say, I also did a series on bullet mastery, and I think it was called the art of swindling in chess, but it was largely about flagging and pre-move skills and all that fun stuff. That typical Naroditsky school of chess, very little quality and a lot of flagging. But in all seriousness, there is definitely an art to that. And there's, in time scrambles, there's certain techniques that you can use to increase your chance of winning on time. And of course, the actual chess improvement dimension of that is very limited, and I don't pretend otherwise. But if you do want to become a Blitz and Bullet game, then the mechanics are very important, and there's no escaping that. And for a lot of people, Blitz and Bullet form a very big part of their lives. That's what they do to unwind. So I think it makes sense to invest time and energy into mastering those mechanics. There's nothing wrong or shameful about that. It's just as much a part of success as working on your tactics or improving your openings.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple follow-ups. I know you say you'll try to keep it short, but I mean, to me, it's interesting. And for listeners who are not that into Blitz, we'll
Well,
talk
I love
some,
talking about this.
yeah, we'll talk some slower chess improvement at some point as well. But one thing is you gave a couple useful time management tips within those articles on chess.com. It was like a multi-part series. But is there any rule of thumb you could give? And the other thing is just, do you have students for whom it's not sort of ingrained to be constantly thinking about the clock when they're playing, like 5 minute in particular? Obviously, in Bullet, you kind of just have to move.
Right. So I think in one of the articles I looked at like 50 of Hikaru's recent Blitz games, and I traced how long he spends on every move, and I tried to find certain patterns and commonalities, and perhaps derive some lessons about time management. Now, none of us are able to play like Hikaru as fast as Hikaru, but one thing that I noticed is I think I called it, the 15-second threshold or the 15-second rule. There's at most in a 3-minute game, there's usually at most one moment in the game when Hikaru spent 15 seconds or more on a move. And you might your eyes might glaze over at that, and you might say, well, why is that important? But when you think about it, that's actually tremendously fast. 3 minutes is quite a lot of time. And, a lot of players, they'll spend 30 seconds on one move and 45 seconds on another easily in a 3-minute game. But one of the keys to success really is relying on your intuition a lot. But there usually was that one moment when he would spend 20, 25 seconds. That usually was the critical moment in the game. So I think that players often err on two opposite extremes. On the one hand, they might play instantly and they might overdo it. And in a Blitz game, they might end up with 2.5 minutes at the end of the game. Well, that's no good if they're going to blunder. And at the opposite end, as you mentioned, are players who just forget about their clock. They just zone the clock out of their minds, and they almost treat a Blitz game like a classical game. And I think this comes back to that psychology of having to rely on your intuition. It's this vicious cycle sometimes where if you don't work on your intuition, it's never going to get better. If you consider yourself an unintuitive player, then you're not going to work on your intuition, and then you're not going to get better. So that cycle goes on and on. So for players who tend to be too slow and just assume that they're slow and they're not able to play intuitively and their tactics are not good, if they make those assumptions about themselves, then they're not going to work on those things. So you just have to be, I think, very fluid when you think of yourself as a chess player. And you have to be willing to put on different hats and put on different clothes, so to speak. And that doesn't mean you have to wear those clothes all the time. You can then revert to being a particular type of Blitz players. There are faster Blitz players and slower Blitz players, and both can be paths to success. but you have to experiment on different ends of the spectrum to get better, I think, at crucial skills.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. And your series just in I read it, and as I said, I think about it sometimes when I'm working on my game, and I've noticed I'm one of those people that would just let my clock go too low too early in the game. And it wasn't unusual for me to think I'm old, so I used to play 5 minute more commonly, where you think 30, 40 seconds, then all of a sudden you're playing a game of 1 minute in a middle game. And now I've gotten better, but I still have these random positions where I just think for, you know, way too long, 30, 40 seconds. So what were you gonna say?
Right now, I was just going to say one more thing to understand is that a lot of players and some of my students, they'll get winning positions all the time. But I think I made that point also in one of my articles on Blitz, where you have to have, at least, and one thing you have to determine is how many seconds you need to make several fundamental checkmates. Test yourself on queen and king against king and see how much time you can checkmate someone and see if you can improve that. Same with rook and king against king. That sounds very trivial, but that can give you a sort of a measuring marker of how much time you can essentially spend to get to those positions. But a lot of players, they don't seem to understand that you can't win a slightly better rook endgame with 5 seconds on the clock unless you're like Ali Reza Firouzja,
Right.
who can win it with half a second on his clock. But most players, you need at least 15, 20 seconds, even in a completely winning position. So it won't do anyone good if out of your 1 minute, you spend 50 seconds and you find the correct path.
Wow, that's a great insight. I really appreciate it. And hearing you mention Ali Reza, that makes me want to get back, excuse me, get back to your own bullet exploits. So Danya, you've been pumping out the YouTube videos. It's super impressive. I was telling you before we started recording, I didn't know about your channel, and now all of a sudden it's like one great video after another. I enjoyed your video about your 1 minute swindle of Magnus, in which you talked about some of your epic matches with him, and you mentioned Ali Reza, who I believe you've also crossed swords with. So I want to hear more about this. Like, I want granular details behind the scenes, but why don't we start by, do you remember the first time you got to play Magnus in either online Blitz or Bullet?
I do. And it was, I think, my junior year of college. I decided to play in one of those Lead Chess titled arenas. And of course, I really wanted to play Magnus. And I think halfway through the tournament, I get paired with, I think he played under the handle Dr. Drunkenstein back then. And, I wasn't taking the tournament too seriously. I was in the sort of computer lab in my dorm, talking with my friends, and kind of playing on the side. And I was playing pretty well. You got to be playing decently well to get paired with Magnus. And when I got paired with Magnus, I was trying not to be rude, and of course my friends knew who Magnus was, but they weren't chess players. And they knew I was playing a bullet tournament, but they didn't quite understand the significance of playing Magnus, because I'd playing Magnus. Okay, you guys all need to quiet down now. And of course, they just kept talking to me because it's just a bullet tournament online. Like, the significance of Magnus isn't fully registered. And I totally understand. I mean, why would it? But to me, it was just this rush. And I actually played very well against him in the first couple of titled arenas. I think I had a plus score. At one point, I beat him a couple times in a row. I could feel myself getting under his skin. I was playing under the nickname Rebecca Harris, which is my account name on Lead Chess. And I sometimes Magnus would stream those titled arenas, and then I'd watch, and sometimes it was in Norwegian, but he would be like, Rebecca Harris, and then he'd roll his eyes. I'd be like, yeah, Rebecca Harris, go Rebecca Harris, and that would give me a rush. So that sort of naturally dovetailed into and transitioned into our long matches, which really started a couple months ago. And Magnus, well, with COVID, he has a lot of downtime. So, I'm decently high rated on Lead Chess. So Magnus would play Penguin with Andrew Tang, Firouzja. And then one day I challenged him and we played, like a 150 game match. And, and normally in those matches, I do decently well. He beat me by a very resounding margin. But I remember one time, this was pretty recently, this was about a month and a half ago. Now, what would happen is I'd log into Lead Chess, I'd see that Magnus is online. He'd have the little green marker next to him. So I'd send him a challenge. But, sometimes he'd be playing another match or he would be away from his computer, whatever, and then he'd accept it, an hour and a half later. But I'm not just sitting there pinned to my computer. So one day I was actually, I think, making pizza. And, I'm cooking a little bit so far as I know how to cook, which is, I'm about a 1200 at cooking.
Right.
And on that particular day, I was actually making steak and I kind of succeeded in it. And from I'm in the kitchen, I'm looking at my computer and I see that Magnus has just accepted my challenge. But the steak is in the oven. So I lifted the skillet off and I grabbed it, of course, by the metal end, and it's blistering hot. And I'd never burned myself quite like that before, but Magnus has just accepted my challenge. So my left hand is in excruciating pain. And I win the first four. I'm moaning in pain, sitting there moaning, and with the other hand, I'm playing Magnus, and I won the first 4 games of the match. And eventually, like 40 games in, the pain subsided. I lost the match, but it was one of my most memorable matches against Magnus. And to me, it's such an honor and a privilege to play Magnus, and it's such a rush. It's quite unlike anything else that I would literally leave everything, including my burning hand, to go and play him. And with Ferrugia, it's I'm more accustomed to even playing forever. We play a lot of 30-second matches, and with Magnus, it's usually 1 minute. Ferrugia is an absolute madman. He is unbelievably fast, and what particularly has impressed me about Ferrugia is his ability to win end games with seconds left on his clock in Russian school of chess style. He will literally play an objectively brilliant end game. I swear, with 2.5 seconds left on his clock, his ability to anticipate pre-moves and to pre-move accurately, much like that of Andrew Tang, is just unbelievable. It has to be seen to be believed, quite literally. So, each of those players, they have a different signature, and our matches take on different contours, but it's something I look forward to, something that really makes my day. But those matches with Magnus, they continue to this day, and they usually last over 100 games. And I may or may not have moved a couple of lessons and postponed a couple of lessons, but that rumor has not been confirmed. So
Right.
don't tell any of my students
Okay.
I
Yeah.
wasn't actually not feeling quite well or traffic at 10 p.m. Anyway.
Yeah. Dog ate your homework. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, those are some great stories. Thank you for sharing them. All right, one quick follow up. I'm sure you get asked this on your Twitch stream all the time, but I have to ask because I haven't caught it. Are this is the story behind Rebecca Harris? Is that divulged or is that secret? That
That's divulged. And I just have to point out that I spent all of 5 seconds creating that account name because I didn't know that it would become big. And Rebecca Harris is just a character in a TV show called Limitless. That's a spinoff off of a movie that I liked. And Rebecca Harris may or may not have been played by an actress who, in my early high school days, well, I'll trail off there. You can
she made an impression on you. Yeah.
She made perhaps a small impression on me. Yes,
Okay.
yes, indeed. So that's all there is. It's not like a mythical. I didn't slay any dragons to create that.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I've always wondered, so I'm glad to get to the bottom of that. All right, let's bring it back to these matches. So one thing that all right, lots of things impressed me about these matches. And first of all, just to follow up on what you were saying about the different contours of the matches, obviously now that you're grinding the YouTube hard, that sounds like that would be an amazing series of videos to add to your to-do list. Just talk about their styles and show some of Ali Reza's technique and stuff like that. I would love to see that. But one thing I'm wondering is, are you like the way you describe it? I try not to talk about poker, but a lot of online poker players will look for matches, and then, like you say, because someone like you can't just play anyone. They're walking around and they don't know when someone's going to show up, and it sort of sounds like that. But once you have someone around your caliber to play, are you guys like corresponding off of the server somewhere, like on Skype? Or whatever it might be, DMs or whatever? Or is it just like play and you don't know how long it'll be and just keep going and going?
Yeah, normally it's the latter. Now, sometimes we usually have the in-game chat open, and after a blunder or a particularly nice move, there'll be like a smiley face exchanged, or someone will say nice, or well, someone will say something not so nice if perhaps flagging has occurred. But there's a mutual understanding, and there might be a Facebook conversation open at the same time. But there's always a mutual understanding that it's the heat of the moment, and some things could be said, and some things could be done in the heat of the moment that doesn't indicate any sort of disrespect. To the contrary, I've always felt that wanting to win is actually a sign of respect, a sign of the deepest respect toward your opponent, because that means you value your opponent to the extent that you would do basically anything to beat him. That means it's meaningful to beat him. And so that's sometimes, I maybe feel a little bit differently about flagging than some players. Now I realize it can get quite egregious in certain situations, but again, I feel like it comes back to the fact that you really want to win, and it means a lot to you to beat an opponent of that caliber, which means that you really do respect him. But to answer your question, there's usually very little, and the etiquette is usually that when you enter the last 5 games, or that you'll have to leave soon, you'll just tell your opponent, last 4 or last 6, and that itself can, if a match is not going well for someone, and you know the person who's winning writes last 2 or something, of course the other player is never happy, and there's always veiled accusation. Oh, okay, last 2, I see. You have some imaginary dinner to attend, of course. So
Right.
where was this dinner when you were losing the match? Then you didn't have to go at 7:30 p.m. Well, now you all of a sudden do. I see how it is. So there's some of that, some tension, but that's part of what makes it fun. And what else would one expect in such a tense match? But we're always friends at the end. And again, there's a fundamental mutual respect, and we both have in the case of Ferrugia, we have tremendous fun playing each other, so that never changes.
Cool. Good stuff. And at this stage, Danya, I mean, in such a sort of small circle of elite bullet players, do you still try to get better? Is there something you're trying to do to sort of step it up even more? And if so, what would that be?
Well, paradoxically enough, I think that what I need to do to get better at Bullet and Blitz is actually get better at classical chess, which is definitely a long-term project of mine. I do want to hit 2,700 at some point, and perhaps take eventually a sabbatical from teaching and streaming, and really try to grind. I need to improve my openings without a doubt. And at my level of Bullet, believe it or not, openings do become important. I mean, a lot of players play their real stuff, even in a 30-second game, which sounds totally absurd, but it actually makes a big impact, because if you get familiar positions, then your intuition, exponentially improves versus constantly trying to play hacky openings. And oftentimes you can just get swept off the board very, very quickly in a bullet or blitz game. So at my level, I feel like I know most of the things. I still can get better at pre-move anticipation, and getting a little bit better at my mouse, but those are all marginal improvements. I think that the serious improvement lies in actually working on my classical chess understanding. And as much as I like to shirk that duty, I think that true, serious improvement lies precisely in that area for me.
Huh, that is paradoxical. That's interesting. So I'm glad to hear it too, because I mean, it seems like you've got a lot of opportunities professionally right now. You're blowing up across platforms. So, and um, classical chess is not necessarily like, it's more about the personal journey. I mean, of course, you have fans rooting for you and stuff, but it's a lot of work, especially right now. So, is that something you're even able to do at this moment, or is it tough during COVID when there's no tournaments to play in?
Yeah, it's definitely tough to find time for training, and right now I've decided to dedicate myself in the next couple of months to streaming and YouTube and coaching, which I enjoy greatly. And I feel like I'm spending time in the chess world. I'm following a lot of the top games, so I'm not getting worse. And if anything, I think I have gotten better, over the past year. But once tournaments resume, and things somewhat go back to normal, I don't know exactly when and for how long this sabbatical will last. Of course, it'll be painful, and I can already say it'll be painful to downsize teaching and streaming. But that's what I'll have to do if I want to be very serious about breaking 2650 or even 2700. Sacrifices have to be made, and like you said, it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet right now. There's just so much I can do, and at times I tend to pile my plate up way too high, and I'm still learning where the balance lies there. So occasionally, on like a Friday night, I will sit down and work on some opening files or work on some tactics. I try to work on tactics regularly. Off stream, I'll do some very serious calculation, but this definitely happens more infrequently than I would like. And as I learn to be more disciplined with my schedule, and it's very challenging to, and I'm very open about this. and I hope I'm not the only one, but I definitely struggle right now to make a proper schedule and to fit all of my lessons in and all of my streams. And at times it cuts into my sleep and it cuts into the time I want to train. But I also try to cut myself some slack. It's only been, a couple of months since I moved to Charlotte and started doing this full time. So hopefully by a year or so, I'll get better at it, and then I'll be able to carve out more time and more energy for actual training.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a challenge. I mean, it's a good problem to have for the most part, but
Definitely.
yeah, I mean, but so do you think with someone as strong at Blitz and Bullet, does that suggest to you that you have like latent untapped talent? Or do you feel like you're just in the same boat as, I don't know what your FIDE is, but whatever 26, like
What?
any other, yeah, any other 2600.
Well, I tend, in general, because of my temperament, I don't give myself too much credit. I tend to have a, if anything, sobering view of myself. But a lot of players have very kindly and encouragingly, and people who I know will be honest with me, a lot of them over 2,700 have told me that I have untapped potential and talent. And I do believe that on some level, especially because I feel like my tactics and calculation have always been sort of the hallmark of my talent. And, I think that my level of calculation is probably over 2,700. I think I have very obvious gaps in my understanding and playing. Some of this is opening related, but I could delve into that. I don't keep this a secret because, it's not like I think I give anybody an advantage if I say this, because hopefully I will improve on these areas at some point. So I think that if I'm able to gather together the discipline to work on those areas, I think it's almost a good problem to have rather than being, 2620 at every area. I feel like I'm, you know, clearly 2,700 plus in some areas and perhaps, 2,580 in others. So I want to raise those up. And I think I know how to do that. It's just about finding the discipline and the time and apportioning everything properly.
Any thoughts of hiring someone to help you with that?
Absolutely. I actually, I have been on the lookout for a coach. And, I've put that off. And actually before COVID started, I had my eyes on a couple of people. And I was in contact with them. But when COVID started, of course, everything changed and the fabric of chess changed. And so I thrust myself fully into streaming and coaching. So I've put that off for the time being. But when I once again become serious about improvement, I definitely want to hire someone. And it's not only because, a lot of people think, well, isn't that absurd? You're a GM. What is there you don't know about improvement? Well, it's not necessarily about that. First of all, there's plenty I don't know about chess and plenty that a lot of people, many of them older and wiser than me, have to teach me about chess and working on chess. But also just having that motivational force, someone who's there as a guide, someone who you don't want to disappoint. To me, that's perhaps the most important thing. Someone who's there to watch over you. And even for me even as a GM, I had a coach, Grandmaster Sahis, with whom I trained for many years. And even as a GM, I couldn't in full conscience come to him and say I didn't do these problems he'd assigned to me. It doesn't matter what my title is. I feel like I've let him down if I haven't done my due diligence. So that I think is worth its weight in gold.
Huh. Okay. Good. Good. Well, I mean, like I said, I'm just glad that it's still on your radar because yeah, it's daunting for anyone to try to improve at classical chess.
Indeed.
So, I mean, another never-ending debate in the chess world is sort of the role of classical chess. So I'm somewhat heartened to hear that even someone as great at the fast games as you are still feels like that it has a place, and you're not totally bored by the idea of playing these like 6-hour games.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I'd be lying if I said classical chess isn't stressful and it, at times doesn't appear thankless. Especially everybody has had the experience of playing a 5-hour game, playing a brilliant game, and then making a mistake on move 60 and losing everything in 1 second. And classical chess is particularly vicious in that regard and can be vicious in that regard. And the rating system is very unforgiving if you play in a lot of American tournaments, as I have. But with all that being said, I still feel like classical chess is the purest form of improvement. It's the ultimate search for almost scientific truth, and with scientific truth comes a certain beauty that I think comes from coming closer to that truth. In Blitz, you can have flashy combinations and amazing displays of intuition, but insofar as actual cold hard improvement goes, I think that classical chess is the path, and I certainly don't intend to throw that to the wind.
Cool. Well, we'll look forward to it whenever it happens. It would be fun. This is not totally classical chess, but it would be fun to see you in a World Cup.
Yeah, I'd love to participate in a World Cup, and one of the problems living in the U.S. is, if it's in Hanty-Mansiysk, that journey is, well, let's just say, not necessarily amenable to good chess being played the day after that. And I've had plenty of stories of falling asleep at the board in European tournaments. But at least now that I'm on the East Coast, it's perhaps a slightly easier travel to Europe, assuming we'll be able to travel to Europe in the next decade. But you know, who knows how that that will happen.
Yeah, let's hope so. So Danya, we're kind of jumping around, but I mean, again, you speaking of your full plate, I have a full outline. So out of all your current projects, I mean, we haven't even mentioned Pog Champs, which you've been doing some announcing and some coaching for. Is there one thing that you're like the most excited for right now?
Well, probably I'll identify two things as usual, not fully answering your question, but I'm probably my purest love and passion is definitely teaching. I love teaching. I love working with the students that I have. I'm very lucky to have the students that I have, and I work with both adults and kids at various levels, and various talents and time constraints. And I just love getting into the minds of various chess players. I believe that each chess player has very unique path to improvement. I can talk more about this later, but to me, I don't pretend to have a one size fits all system. That I think some coaches say that they have that, which they apply to each student and promise improvement. I absolutely don't have that. Each student has their unique view of the game, and I myself learn a lot from. And it might sound absurd, but really it isn't. Even a 1700 adult could have certain insights into certain positions, ways that he thinks that I think about that and I say, well, that's really nifty. Let's flesh that out a little bit further. Let's extract the good parts of that and let's fix the mistakes. I love doing that. It's almost like putting on your investigator hat and delving into their games and trying to figure out what their weaknesses are. And that's partly why I love history as well. Again, the topic of jumping around, because you investigate the motivations of what drove person X to do action Y. It's almost like investigative work. I love research, and chess coaching is quite like research in many ways. So that really is perhaps my purest passion. But right now, what I'm enjoying greatly as well is, of course, streaming, because it combines my two really greatest loves, which is talking, especially for long periods of time about very little, and playing Blitz and Bullet. And I get to do both at the same time. And I'm, again, extremely privileged to have an amazing community that cheers me on and supports me, win or lose, success or failure. And I don't take that for granted at all. And Twitch is it's an interesting place. It can have its upsides and its downsides, its highlights and its lowlights. It's amazing supporters and vicious trolls.
Hmm.
But I think that I try to stick to what I promised to do, which is Blitz and Bullet and level-headed good chess. And I share my passion with my community, and in turn, they enrich my love for Blitz and Bullet and for analyzing games. So right now, I do stream a lot. I try to find time, whether it's at 3 a.m. or 7 a.m. sometimes. When I can't go to sleep, I'll hop on the stream. And even when I'm really tired, I don't remember the last time I streamed and regretted it. So it's been going tremendously well recently, and it's been very, very fun.
That's cool. And are you trying to do so you mentioned just hopping on whenever, but do you also try to do certain times? I've had other streamers I've interviewed tell me that you need to stick to a schedule for the sake of your viewers.
I think that I do. One does need to stick to a schedule for the sake of the viewers, but the mistake there you're saying is for the sake of the viewers. Fortunately, I've tried many times to make a streaming schedule, and usually out of the seven, if I stream 6 days a week, I might make one day within 3 hours of when I said I'd stream, but I quickly realized that that's just not me. Now, I usually stream at around the same time. I stream late evening or night. That's kind of my slot. 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Eastern. And I think most people just kind of know that that's when I stream. Obviously, I will announce special streams well in advance. If I do like a 24-hour stream, or if I do a particular commentary stream, I'll announce that. But by and large, because I feel like, unlike some other streamers who are full time streamers, streaming to me is still what I do for fun. I don't rely on that for. I'm not a professional streamer. I stream a lot, but my job, insofar as one can call it a job, is a chess coach. And because my teaching schedule is always in flux, because it depends on personal relationships, and I move lessons around all the time, my students move lessons around all the time, it's very hard to adhere to a specific streaming time. So that's just a compromise I've made, and I think people have been extremely understanding toward that.
That's cool. I mean, it's refreshing to hear you prioritize the actual coaching so much because in the business world, obviously people are always talking about things that scale. And uh, you know, teaching chess can be very rewarding. But when you're teaching someone one on one, there's only so much money you can make. So from a business perspective, it's not always the best thing. But I'm glad that that's not the only thing that drives you.
Yeah, that's very true, and I've had that discussion with with family and a lot of my friends, and absolutely valid point. And I've thought about this, and that's partly why I've done YouTube and all of that stuff. I'm sensitive to the fact that it's not very scalable. But like you said, as I get older, I realize what my priorities are, and I want to make. Let me be very clear about this. Of course, I want to make good money and live well, and that gives me joy, and I'm very lucky to be able to do that, and do what I love. And I don't take that for granted. A single day that I do it, but I wouldn't be who I am if I were. Teaching to me is like the air that I breathe. I feel like I have to do it. And streaming, part of the reason I enjoy streaming so much is because I think my stream has taken on sort of a pedagogical bent. Even when I play Blitz and Bullet, now, yes, sometimes I'm, smashing my mouse after losing a bullet game. I'm not going to deny that. But at other times, I'm trying to really get to the bottom of why I do things. And that self questioning also leads me to become a better chess player and, sometimes even a better person. And I do a lot of game analysis on stream. And if I didn't hone that craft constantly through teaching, I feel like it would wither away, just like any muscle or skill that you don't practice or exercise.
Makes sense. Yeah, and in a similar vein, I'm impressed. John Bartholomew's been on the show a couple times. Obviously, he's had a lot of success in his various chess endeavors, including Chessable. But I know he still does a decent amount of lessons, and that's something that always impresses me about him. And you can see the passion, and you can see that it makes him a better presenter across the board. So it definitely there are people who have like high level success in the chess world who still make time for their students.
Right. No, I mean, and I think that if I went full time streaming and YouTube, things could explode, and maybe I'd end up making more money. But like I said, I feel like I would be the quality of what I do depends on me teaching consistently, and it's what grounds me. And I also think that if I relied on streaming for all of my income, it would it would make me more stressed out. And I think in streaming, it's very important to have a relationship with your community where you are express tremendous appreciation for everything that you get, but at the same time, you don't make your community feel like an individual viewer is obligated or in some way beholden to you, or must subscribe to your channel or donate, because that's ridiculous. Because that person didn't ask you to stream. He might be very appreciative of the fact that you stream, but he didn't ask you to stream, and by no means does he owe you anything, even if you put in a lot of work. So it's a very fragile dynamic, and one that's very important to maintain. And the fact that I teach allows, I think, me to maintain it better than if I personally, and a lot of people who are full-time streamers are able to maintain it. But I think for me personally, knowing myself, it's important that I also teach, and that's sort of the groundwork that puts everything else together.
Gotcha. And you did mention downsides of streaming and trolls. Is that what's the most negative thing about streaming? I'm just curious because so many people want to get into it, and so many people are trying it right now.
There's a couple of things. And it's not a secret that recently there's been a lot of, with the explosion of chess has come a lot of drama and a lot of sort of mini incidents. And this person said that about that person. And that's one of the things is Twitch chess is a pretty narrow community. So everything that anyone said is amplified by trolls. Everybody types and their font size is the same, but what the trolls say can sometimes feel like it's dominates over the entire chat. What are your thoughts on this person saying this? And they're trying to bait you. So that can be one of those things where you just unwittingly get caught up. And you have to be very careful about distinguishing genuine questions from those. So that's one thing. And the other is that, you know, a lot of chess players they've hopped on the streaming train, and it's just very hard to make it. I mean, oftentimes you have 5 viewers for the first 3 months that you stream, and you feel like you're not being appreciated, and you feel like you have to play sort of the politics to get the raids and to get the recognition. And unfortunately, I have no way to sugarcoat it. That just is true. There's a lot of grandmasters who are tremendous blitz players and deserving of a big following, but they don't get it because Twitch chess right now is so saturated
Yeah.
that's simply the way that it is. So I will caution anybody who's thinking about going to streaming not to think of themselves and see that 1,000 next to the viewership count, and to do it, because they'd be playing that blitz anyway, and to really moderate their expectations when it comes to the success.
Yeah, definitely very good advice and echoed by Levy Roseman when he was on the show. He said something very similar. Um, yeah, I as I've mentioned several times, I mean, I don't watch a ton of Twitch streams, but yeah, more than ever when I turn it on, it's just like there's four people I want to be watching all at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes I do watch two people at the same time, but at the end of the day, you can really only you got to choose who you follow and who you watch. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's bring it back to improvement. I know that's one of your passions, and we have a question from a supporter of the show, from Patreon supporter Todd Bryant, aka Strong Chess. So Todd asks, he said, "Hey, Daniel, I've read that as a kid you filled up notebooks with handwritten analysis. What kind of things did you put in these notebooks? As an adult, do you feel this was an effective technique, and do you still take handwritten notes today?"
Definitely. So, actually, handwritten notes is how my first book, Mastering Positional Chess, came about. So what I would do, and I've always loved writing. I feel like writing to me, writing stuff down helps me not only memorize stuff, but internalize it and kind of extract the marrow from it, if that makes sense. And I think each person has, it's not necessarily writing that does that, that fulfills that purpose for everybody, but I think everybody has that particular technique that they can implement, which helps them learn the best. For me, it was always writing. And the things that I'd write in those notebooks, usually it was analysis of games. So, for example, I would have a lesson with my coach, and we'd look at 4 or 5 games, complete games, and then what I'd do is I'd temporarily erase the notes from the file that would be created as a consequence of the lesson. I would take notes during the lesson, and then I'd basically recreate the analysis in a notebook, of course, with my own angle, and I would try to go deeper than that analysis and find mistakes in it and ask questions about it. And what would ensue is a fully annotated game or a fully annotated position. The other thing I do is I'd include examples from books that I found particularly inspiring, and if I would never use the actual book and copy annotations from that book, I would set up the position independently, try to analyze it entirely on my own. Then, of course, I'd compare it to the book. I'd find that most of the stuff I said was flat out wrong, or the most profound thing that I thought I said was the most obvious point made in the book annotation. So I'd see how much there was still left to learn, but eventually I got better at it, and I tackled a lot of different concepts. So, for example, when I was rated about 2,000, my biggest weakness was definitely positional understanding. So I took 100, 200 pages of notes on positional understanding and the stuff we did with my coach, and that sort of sprouted then into a book.
The book that you wrote. the non, because you wrote two books, right?
Right. Mastering Positional Chess is the one that sprouted from the handwritten notes, and the Mastering Complex Endgames was a similar process, but I did start out writing it thinking that it would then become a book. With Mastering Positional Chess, I didn't in my wildest dreams assume that those handwritten notes would be, and there's a photo, sort of an image of them in the preface to Mastering Positional Chess. I've always wanted to write a book and publish a book, even as a kid. I wrote short stories, and I filled up notebooks with these random stories, and I still very much enjoy writing short stories to this day. So it's not only chess writing that I enjoy, but I didn't think that that would be transformed into a book.
And how old were you when you published your first book?
I think it was 2008. I was 12 and a half or so.
That is insane.
Yeah, well, no, no, it was, I was 13 and a half, I think. It was, no, it was more than 12. I think I finished it when I was 12 and a half, and it actually got published when I was, I think, 13 and a half, or just turned 14, something to that effect. I don't want to pretend like I'm embellishing anything. I truly don't remember the exact age, but it was in that ballpark. I
Wow.
remember my mom picked me up from school. I was in eighth grade. I think I remember that. I should know how old I was when I was in eighth grade, but it's all jumbled in my head now. And she handed me a copy of Mastering Positional Chess, and I remember the euphoria. It was just wow, just seeing it in print, and of course, it would not have been possible without New in Chess, which decided to take this project on, despite the fact that there was so much editing to be done, and they were tremendously kind, and still are to me to this day. So, the book has one author on its front page, but it could not have been published and written without an entire constellation of people that were cheering me on every step of the way.
That's cool. So it sounds like you had kind of a natural work ethic, but when I was researching your bio, correct me if I'm wrong, but your dad is a mathematician and your mom is a pianist,
Yes, that's
and,
correct.
and you're Russian, so it's like you were bred in a lab to play chess. It's
Exactly. Yeah, the fact that I speak Russian, I grew up speaking Russian, I still speak Russian to my family, is very important, not only because of the stereotype, I'm Russians play chess very good, but also because I have access to a lot of literature that's been written in the Soviet Union, which hasn't been translated. And I basically grew up on that literature. And as an example, there's something called the Black Series, and it takes its name from the fact that the books were bound in this black hardcover, this cover, and it was a series on top chess players, but they weren't necessarily world champions. There were a bunch of Soviet masters that most people have never heard of, like Abar's Gipslis or Vasily Panov. Some people have heard of the Panov attack, but the player himself was also very impressive. He never became a grandmaster, and it would usually be written by the players themselves, and they would annotate their games. And there was a certain charm and a certain depth to those annotations. Like it's one of those things that it's not that good resources don't exist anymore. In fact, they exist in far greater number and variety, but it's hard for me to explain, but I think people can understand what I'm saying. In the old days, especially in the Soviet Union, there was just that love for chess and that juice of these annotations that really taught me a lot about positional chess, especially, and calculation, all those skills that I think I apply in my games now.
huh. Other formative books for you, whether Russian or English?
Um, yeah, it's funny because I have a funny story about this. I can try to share it quickly as I think about what books. Is just guys for me to think about the book. So, um, and I'll try to be quick. So Gary Kasparov, many years ago, he hosted these master classes for talented youth. I think it's 2005 or six. And I participated in one of them. And the first time I was very overwhelmed by Kasparov, just walked into the room and everybody gasps. And as luck would have it, as everyone was exiting the building where the masterclass was held, Kasparov and my mom and I were in the same elevator together. It was just the three of us. And of course, we're awkward. And then the elevator hits the ground floor. Kasparov starts talking and asks me about, my rating and stuff like that. And eventually, we're standing outside, and he asked me, "Okay, so whose games do you look at for training?" And I drew a complete blank. Like when somebody asks you what your favorite movie is, and you can't remember the title of a single movie. And I was staring. I said, "Karpov's games." And I'm telling this to Kasparov, and my mom was horrified. But Kasparov took it very well, and he complimented Karpov. So, in terms of books that had a formative effect on me, um, I should probably identify first of all a book called "Learn from the Legends" by Romanian Grandmaster Mihail Marin, which is a recent. I think it was published in 2007, and it's a tremendous analysis of essentially every world champion and their greatest strength. And I think Bobby Fischer was associated with his use of the two bishops. And it's very sort of non-cliche. It's things that you might not necessarily think about. Tremendous impact on my chess. It really, helped me understand all of these individual dimensions. Of course, I read my 60 memorable games by Fischer. Love that as well. And yeah, I'd have to think about more, sort of formative books. Zurich 1953 by Bronstein is another thing that comes to mind. My first ever book, I remember that was Capablanca's Chess Primer. And I recently cracked open, John Donaldson, who I mentioned before, was kind enough to gift me a first edition copy of Capablanca's Chess Primer, and I cracked it open recently. And I was engrossed. It's actually fascinating, even for me as a GM, the crystal clear way that he writes. And Lasker's chess manual is the same way. I I know this might sound weird, but I highly recommend it to players because first of all, Capablanca was no fool. This idea
Right.
that yeah, I mean he was really really good and good at calculation. So I can highly recommend that to players of any level. So that's just a small overview. There are many more books and many more great players.
Yeah, there are so many. And one thing that I feel like is one of the defining questions here on Perpetual Chess, though, is like how to pick what to study. So with your students, I mean, there's these great books. We talk about them all the time. There's so many classics, but then there's also calculation work, and especially players at the club level, myself included, just feel like our calculation could always be better. It's always going to be an issue. So what do you tell your students in terms of how to budget their precious study time?
Right. So of course that's what I consider to be the main brunt of my job. Of course, the lessons themselves are important, but I feel like I haven't done my job if I don't help them formulate their training routine. And with most of my students, I also actually develop material and develop problems that are very much tailored to their weaknesses and send them to. So sometimes I feel like there just are not necessarily books or preset problems that target their exact weakness. And this comes back to what I said about weaknesses usually being a lot more fine grained than people think they are. But I would say that one important thing is to realize that solving tactics online, as valuable as it is, usually doesn't it's not a deep clean of your calculation trade. It's good as a warm up, but a lot of people they rely on that exclusively, and I feel like they don't see their calculation improve. Obviously, there's the famous problem with tactics where it's like somebody's tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "Well, Ben, you have to find a 3-move tactic this position because you're solving on you're solving on chess.com, which is a great tactics trainer, but that's just an inextricable from solving tactics. So there are several ways around that. Of course, there's plenty of books that have. One thing I can recommend is the Encyclopedia of Chess Combinations, and they have what I call dirty tactics. Now, it's not dirty in the sense of Naroditsky flagging someone dirty, but it's more dirty in the sense that sometimes the end result of a tactic is not a checkmate, but it's plus over minus. It's an extra pawn. And there's a lot of books that actually tackle that, and sometimes you have to dig deep, and that's something that I help my students with is finding those books. Another thing I can recommend is a little known book called The Best Move by two Czech grandmasters, which has precisely those kinds of problems, which cross the bridge between positional understanding and calculation. Amazing stuff. So there are books that help with that, but the main thing I'd say is it's usually not enough to just solve tactics online, even if you do a lot of that. And with books, you want to be very, very both economical and stingy about how much you read and what you read. Sometimes you only want to read one chapter out of one book and another chapter out of another book. As much as I like reading books from cover to cover, sometimes that's what you need to do, and sometimes I help students craft that particular routine
Oh,
as
yeah.
well.
Good advice. And then you got to get the game analysis in there as
Mhm.
well. So yeah, it's
Absolutely.
it's tough. Yeah, and obviously we could talk about that for hours, but Danya, you've been generous with your time. I just want to hit a couple more topics and one more Patreon question if you're up for it. Um, Awesome. So let's get to the question from supporter of the podcast, John Rockefeller. So those who support the podcast find out when we have big shot guests like Danya in advance and are able to send in questions. So John asked, he said, you recently live streamed analysis for several of US Chess's Invitational National Chess Championships, which were run online this year for the first time. Was there anything that surprised you about that experience? Any improvements you recommend? What advice would you give to commentators analyzing games between scholastic players?
Well, I definitely have a lot to learn, still learn when it comes to commentary. I love doing commentary, and doing the Barber and the Rockefeller was a great experience. One thing that I'd say is, um, you want to be very dynamic when it comes to looking at games. If you're commentating a tournament that has a lot of games, such as a Scholastic tournament with like 15, 20 boards, normally now you want to concentrate on the top boards. But what I see some commentators doing is, this is, I'll be honest, a pet peeve of mine, even in top tournaments, the fixation on one particular game, and they'll lose track of time, and analyze, one position for 30, 45 minutes. And then meanwhile, epic actions have happened on the other boards. And I feel like I've missed some of the fun. So you have to be constantly scouring the games to see if anything interesting is happening, and you want to be very dynamic when it comes to switching around. Now that's hard to do without making sure that the viewers don't lose themselves and which game is this, which game is that. So one thing that I found effective is to constantly remind viewers, okay, this is the game between this person and this person, and they're playing the Rockefeller board too. And even though that may sound very repetitive, I feel like it grounds viewers, and it's almost like they're watching a movie and there's protagonists, and there's people they start rooting for, and you want to animate these players. You want to, just like in basketball, you talk about players, and you give statistics. This person is 45% from the 3-point line, and this person set this record. That's interesting, and I feel like the same should be done with players, and especially Scholastic players. Find some interesting stats about them. Where are they from? How did they learn chess? Who was their first chess coach? What interesting fact do they have about themselves? These players would love to give that information, maybe to fill out a quick survey, especially if they're playing online. People love to talk about themselves, and I feel like that would really help viewers. It would animate these people in their minds. It would just be more than a name and a rating. So that's another sort of maybe more specific request or piece of advice that I'd give to perhaps the organizers of tournaments going forward, in the COVID age, especially.
Yeah, that sounds harder than when you're just doing like the I'm not a GM tournament or a single event where there's just one game
Right.
or a series of games to track.
Yeah, absolutely. When there's one game, it has its own challenges, but by and large, I loved doing I am not a GM, but it's definitely a lot easier.
Yeah, you and Robert Hess were great doing that.
Thank you.
As it,
Appreciate that.
and the chess was compelling too, of course. Okay, so Danya, we got to get some impressions. I almost forgot until I heard you bust out the Russian accent. So I'm so glad that you did that. Your Yasser, that little video you made of Yasser outtakes, absolutely killed me. So I've now asked Levy, Roseman, and Amon Hambleton for their impersonation secrets. So I gotta complete the triumvirate and ask you as well.
Well, Ben, I have to tell you one thing, that this entire interview reminds me of an interview that I did at Tilburg with, what was his name? Walter Cronkite. Yes, now Walter Cronkite was at Tilburg, and he was interviewing F.M. Geller. And after F.M. Geller's interview, they interviewed me. Exactly, Ben. So that's how that kind of started. Precisely, yes.
Yeah, the Tilburg riff kills me.
Wake on Zay and Torena love Yasser, and he's complimented me on the impression. That embarrassed me a little bit, but he's absolutely great.
Yeah,
I guess him and Kasparov might be two of the ones I worked on the most.
yeah. I mean, yeah, Kasparov, I feel like that's got to be in your wheelhouse with your Russian background. But yeah, greatly enjoy both of those. So is that something you workshopped before? I asked, I think it was Levy the same question. Did you practice offline before you did it online, or was it
Yeah,
spontaneous?
with Kasparov, he doesn't have a conventional Russian accent, kind of like Alexander Grishuk, it's kind of simple. But with Kasparov, it's more like it's a cross between the British accent and the American, the Russian accent. There's elements of both, that are prevalent, but so you have to. It's actually a very distinct thing. And I never thought I would be able to do Kasparov's accent. So it's definitely I definitely practice it, and in the shower sometimes I'll absentmindedly start, and it's I make myself laugh that way. Okay, if you had any suspicions that I wasn't a lunatic, well, I've removed all doubt. So yeah, I definitely practice them, and I enjoy doing it. And I think one thing I've been, everybody knows that I hold these players in the highest regard, and it's all in good fun, and they themselves join in, and I encourage people to impersonate me, and I would love to see it. It's an open challenge to anybody, especially if they want to get back at me. So by all means, I'd love to see, you
Yeah.
know, to see them take some revenge.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of being terrified in the elevator when you see Kasparov, I wouldn't be scared to imitate Yasser. He has that sort of, he seems very down to earth and friendly and takes things in good fun. But Kasparov, I would be scared of being on the wrong side.
Yeah, absolutely. But one quick thing I'll say is when I try to master, or at least get better at an impersonation, it usually starts with one word that they pronounce in a particularly distinct way. Like with Kasparov, it was two things. So it's the way he says Karpov, it's a Korpov,
Mhm.
Korpov, and I'll say Korpov, Korpov. I was playing Korpov, and then it's easier to get the other words than that. And the other thing was, like
Yeah, yeah, that's good.
but I mean, and so so it's easier then to get. Yeah, now I feel like I can't stop speaking like Kasparov. It's easier to get the other sentences, and so that's kind of a little tip if anyone's interested. I think in, not that I'm a ventriloquist, but if anyone's
Well,
interested in trying to get those impersonations down, that's how I start.
cool. Well, we're almost done. So if you just want to finish in the Kasparov voice, that's okay. That's okay with me. So I did want to ask you about moving to Charlotte. Did Peter Giannatos of the Charlotte Chess Club, did he recruit you, or was that your own decision, or how did that come about?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. So, Peter and I have been friends for a long time, for many years. And, I've always thought that what he's doing, he founded the Charlotte Chess Center, which is doing amazing things for chess, not only in Charlotte, but across the country and the world. And even in the COVID age, they organize cutting edge chess camps with people like Topalov and bring unprecedented opportunities to basically the entire range of young chess players. So, Peter and I had been friends. And there was a standing offer that he made for me to be a grandmaster in residence in Charlotte, because Charlotte didn't have a GM. And this was particularly to work with some of the talented young players in Charlotte, of which there are quite a few. And of course, at that time, I was still in Stanford. So originally, I was supposed to do a master's, but I had a bit of a change of heart, and I figured, I've got a lot of friends in Charlotte, Peter among them, and I just felt like this is what my soul wanted to do. And I'm just honored to be a part of what Peter has created. And the city of Charlotte is just a booming chess city now, and I think that really this, of course, the COVID has introduced an entirely new wrinkle to this. But you know, uh, assuming that everything is in place when all of this blows over, I think that really the sky's the limit, and I'd love to be a part of developing maybe Charlotte's Charlotte-born young master, and perhaps we'll cultivate some grandmasters eventually as well. So I'm really hopeful, and I'm definitely indebted to Peter, and I encourage everybody who visits Charlotte, who stops by Charlotte, to stop by the Chess Center, and there's just a lot of good stuff that's going on here.
That's cool. Yeah, they're doing absolutely amazing work. In fact, when I was checking out there's tournaments going on now somehow. Is that
There
right?
is there is a
Yeah.
tournament going on right now. Yep, and a norm tournament, IM and GM norm tournament, and of course, very stringent measures have been taken, and Peter, I know, works very hard to make sure of that. But I think it's great to finally give some players an opportunity to play. Of course, everybody's so hungry to play, especially young players for whom this is like the golden time where they really need to play. So I think it's great. And yeah, there's a tournament going on. It's 6 minutes away from me. There are chess games being played right now, which is awesome.
Yeah. And lifestyle wise, you enjoying Charlotte?
Very much so. I mean, of course, it's just a tad more affordable than the Bay Area. Just
Just a bit, yeah.
just a little bit.
Although it's cratering now, at least San Fran is. So
Yeah, it is, but still, it's incomparable. And I love the city. It's it has so many things to do. Diverse, and it's it's close to Atlanta. It's not far from New York. So I'm really enjoying my time in Charlotte. The weather takes some getting used to, being from the Bay Area and being very spoiled in that way, but it's definitely a place that I'm staying in for the foreseeable future, and I'm really enjoying my time here.
Cool. Glad to hear it. I had one more
Hmm.
related question, but it's escaping me. So if I don't think of it in 10 seconds, I'm gonna let you go.
It's all
um,
good.
um,
Was it about Charlotte?
oh no, it was what was your master's gonna be in?
It was going to be in history, just like my undergrad degree.
Okay.
And it was not a lighthearted decision because like I said, I love history and I love the humanities and writing, but I felt like this was, the opportunity train only comes around a few times, and I decided to jump on it.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it was the right decision. I mean, you're very talented across the board, Danya. It's something to behold, like between the announcing and the Twitch presenting and the impressions and the actual chess. So it's just fun to watch.
Well, I appreciate it, Ben, and this has been a real pleasure. Like I said, I'm a big fan of your podcast. I think you're doing a great thing. Just having so many different players and chess personalities are on, and I know for a fact that a lot of my titled friends also are fans of your show. So, thanks for doing what you're doing. You're doing a big part.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. All right. So people know your Twitch channel, your YouTube channel. Every once in a while you pop in on Twitter. And anywhere else people should be I mean, obviously your events on chess.com. What's the single best way to reach you, Danya?
Single best way to reach me is probably through my website, danielnaroditskychess.com. There's a contact form. Believe it or not, it does go into my email address. Now, I will say that my email has been completely flooded since PogChamps with coaching requests. And, there's some emails I haven't been able to get back to yet, but I do promise that I will get back to every single person. It just takes me some time. And I'm somebody who I like to take my time and write thoughtful responses rather than, just brag about the speed of response. So you're welcome to reach out to me through my website. I also can be found on Facebook, and anybody can feel free to send me a message there. And I generally respond to that quite fast. So I cannot promise I'm very, very booked when it comes to teaching, but I'm usually more than happy to help players out in any way that I can and answer questions and share stories. So very much look forward to hearing from the viewers and the listeners of the podcast.
Awesome. Good stuff, man. We'll keep up the good work, Danya. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, man. This has been great.